So is somebody saving some pizza for me?
No promises are made.
Man, I would give you some right over this connection if it would fit. It's just such thin bandwidth, man. All right. Are we streaming? Are we live? Is it
I know.
working?
Oh yeah,
Somebody just
the
said that
stream's
the
working.
live stream participated.
Sorry, Benjamin, what did you say?
Oh yeah, the stream's working. I just checked it.
Yep, it's
Oh,
showing.
cool. Thanks. All right. All righty. I think we're all good. Ed, you want to go ahead and take it away?
All right. So just to double check, audio good?
Yep, we can hear you.
Awesome. So it's been a while since I've been able to attend a Utah Rust meetup. I think I only, granted, there's people far enough away from the camera I can't tell, but I only recognize, I think, two people in the room. Hello. I'm Ed Page. I used to be up in Utah. I'm now in Texas. I'm now also a member of the cargo team, and that's what in the very fast brainstorming session Nathan had with me, what we decided for me to talk about. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what it means to be on the cargo team. I'm going to just step through. This is going to be a preview of the types of things that are upcoming in cargo. The first thing is there's just been a lot of very small quality of life improvements. So you might be familiar if you run cargo run dash dash help. This is the kind of output you normally expect from cargo. Well, over the next couple of releases, it's going to be changing to, oops, wrong, there. It's going to be changing to that. Sorry for the people who like dark themes, but anyways. So the couple of things you'll notice is there's color, and but not just that, but you'll see that the options is now broken out into categories. So instead of just seeing this flat list and you're trying to figure out, find the option you're looking for in that list, we now have it broken down by the categories that you see if you run cargo help run. So a relatively minor thing, but still kind of a nice to have. So the next thing I wanted to point out is, so something that might not be as obvious. Let me go back to that help output. If you see some of the flags like dash dash package, you'll see that spec is in square brackets. That means it's optional. Well, what that means you can do is you can do cargo check dash dash package, and the error message will actually say, hey, here's the valid values for package. That's pretty handy. Well, when you do that with, I've been occasionally needing to do some cross compilation, and Target didn't actually do that for me. So I went ahead and made it so it now say, oh, run rust up target list to see possible targets. Just the list of targets is too long, so we at least, instead of showing them all, we provide that hint instead. So just a small little quality of life thing just to help people find the next step through the errors they're having. Similarly, if you run cargo install, say you want to install a debug version of ripgrep. Does it take that long before it gets to the error? Maybe I should pick a faster tool. Anyone know a very fast tool to cargo install? Oh, sorry. That's right. I have the flag backwards is the problem. So you do cargo install release, and it's just like, hey, I don't know what that means, but examples looks close enough for some weird reason. That seems like a bug in clap that I need to fix. But anyways, examples looks close enough. How about you just use the examples? Well, we now have specialized the hints for these kinds of things. And if you now do release, it's like, hey, release is the default mode. So instead, we offer the debug flag if it's needed. So just, again, small quality of life improvements to just make things a little bit better. Similarly, if let me run cargo check, package, oh, what would be it? Windows sys. Hey, there's actually like 3 different versions of Windows sys in here, and you have to be more specific about which one you select. Well, it requires you to actually say Windows sys dash, or whoops, Windows sys 0.48.0. Oh, hey, that's fun. There's a bug in cargo. Anyways, so like if you have to type in the whole version. Well, we actually went ahead and made that optional. So you still can see the panic, but You can now type in just the amount of version to disambiguate it, which will make this very easy and very nice for when you're on large workspaces and having to do a lot of annoying things.
Nice.
Next thing is for the small little quality of life improvements I'm going to talk about. Is we improved the errors for when parsing a manifest. Does this show up well?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So we went from just saying, "Oh, hey, oh, is this my cursor that's the problem?"
No, my cursor, sorry.
Oh.
I'm trying to
So we
think
went
how
from
remote it
just
might be that I'm streaming here.
so we went from just saying like, "Oh, hey, this field isn't the right value," to actually showing you like where in the code that error is actually happening. So just again, small little quality of life improvements for these kinds of things. So besides these, we've also been working on a couple other bigger features. One of them is for anyone who is in a corporate environment, there is now a what's called registry authentication and credential process. What that means is you'll now be able to allow authenticated access to a registry. So like if you have a corporate registry that's in the cloud, you can be able to have people log in. And then instead of trying to support every potential way of getting the access token to the registry for authentication, we have support for plugins that are external processes. So you can be able to either reuse one of the plugins we provide or write your own for your custom authentication scheme. And so you can be able to look up like, oh, how do I get my token for this one kind of system? Oh, it needs to like go to this website and do these different handshakes, and then it'll give the token to Cargo. We now support being able to do all of that.
That's really
Another
cool.
one,
Ed, I got a related question. Actually, we got some hands up here. Can we
oh,
go
sorry,
ahead
didn't
and
can't see the hands. Sure.
no worries.
Waving to.
Oh, you waving? Well, I got a question. Is there like a Rust project endorsed um, Crates.io implementation that people should run as an external private registry?
Not at this time.
Okay.
Crates.io itself is not really, it's very hard coded for being Crates.io, and so it's not easy just to take that and run it as your own registry. And there's a couple of them that are out. One just announced that they open sourced their implementation. And so it's kind of a piecemeal, hopefully it's modern enough to be able to use all the features we want of it type of a thing. It'd be great if Crates.io was generalized for being able to keep people like up more on the bleeding edge of features that we develop.
Right. Okay.
All right. So the next big feature that is coming up is actually I was talking with Eric, who originally started this meetup at RustConf, and he made the comment to me of like, there's this tool out there called Cargo Cranky that allows me to store all of my lint configuration in a file and then read that lint configuration and run the tools that I want to be able to like do my lint control. I was just like, we've got you for that. So there is, oh, collapse you. We now support the ability to, this is going to be released in, I believe, 174, where there's now a lints table where you can be able to, let me actually not pick a workspace example, where you can be able to say things like, for the Rust lints, unsafe forbid, or Clippy lints, do this. The big advantage this has is we actually ran into this problem in the Cargo team. We have a very large set of controls we want to apply to Clippy across our entire workspace. But if you just set your lints in your librs, you have to set that in every librs across your entire workspace, every main RS in your entire workspace, and every individual test binary in your workspace. The alternative is you can have a config file with Rust flags, but that causes all sorts of recompilation churn for different scenarios. So this makes it so that we're able to more easily control the lints for your entire workspace or all of the uh, different build targets within your even within one package. So now I'm going to talk about some things that are a little bit further out there. One is for people who have been around for, I think this has probably been a year or two, there was before a tool called Cargo or a collection of tools called Cargo Edit, and that's where Cargo Add and Cargo Remove came from. And one tool from that set that's been not merged yet is Cargo Upgrade, and that's one where we finally settled on a design and we're going to be merging that in. So that's something that's going to be upcoming. But there's a couple of a bit bigger of projects. And something to note about these projects is how project teams work. The cargo team is not let me throw something over the wall and the cargo team will go implement it for you. We're more of just the decision makers, the people who have been viewed as having enough experience to be able to make a decision of like, this makes sense or this doesn't make sense for a build system. And really, most of the work actually happens through people's contributions. So something to keep in mind is it's through your help that any of this kind of stuff happens. It just helps that I have a little bit more time due to my job to be able to implement some of these things. So that's where some of these things are coming from. One thing that is frequently coming up is around what's referred to as MSRV, minimum supported Rust version. This is if you're, say, in a corporate environment, you might need to upgrade your version of Rust. Might need to do some certifications on your version of Rust, and you only upgrade your version of Rust once a year or so. But if you just randomly depend on packages from Crates.io, they'll be using all sorts of newer versions of Rust, and your build will fail. We've been slowly improving this with things like a Rust version field, so you can declare your Rust version, and that way people at least get a better error message about it. The thing that's now exists under a unstable feature flag is if you do cargo add, it'll actually make sure that the version requirement is low enough for your MSRV, your minimum supported Rust version. And if you do a cargo update with this unstable feature flag, it'll actually make sure that it doesn't upgrade you to a dependency that's too new for your version of Rust. So that'll make things a little bit easier to manage. As part of this also, we've changed our policy. We've before been telling projects, if you're a library, don't commit your lock file. That came from before the days of GitHub Actions, before the days of a lot of these different tools we have. Sorry, Nathan, while I just endorsed a GitHub project, I'm going to now denounce a GitHub project. Like, ignore Dependabot. RenovateBot is where it's at. So
I haven't even heard of it.
it's awesome. I can talk about it in a second. But with all these things that have improved within the community, we felt that our motivating reason for not having people check in their lock file, which it was your library, you can't predict what version of dependencies your library is going to be used with. So always test that head to make sure that you always work with your entire set of dependencies. That way you're more likely to catch problems that your users are going to have. With all these other tools out now, it's much easier to provide that experience without it. So we now encourage commit your lock file, which also makes verifying your minimum supported Rust version much easier.
So the recommendation now is just always commit your log file, whether it's a binary file,
Well,
whether it's a library.
the way we actually word it is the default choice. If it is to we before were you must never commit your lock file. It was a very much like a hard rule that we had it documented as. It's now referred to in the documentation as the starting point or the default choice. That's a very a 180 in the softening of the language. I still refer to it as just as a recommendation. It's just not a you shall. It's a we recommend. But yes, it is in all cases we recommend it. But if it makes sense for your project not to, do what works best for your project.
Okay.
So just the quick endorsement of RenovateBot, it's a lot more flexible. I think Dependabot just barely got group support. I don't think it's as so for those that don't know, Dependabot is a tool that GitHub provides that lets you have automated update of your dependencies. So you can it'll just create PRs for you. But it's very limited. It's not very configurable. It doesn't have many features. RenovateBot allows a lot of things like, let me group all of my safe dependency updates into a single PR, and then let me make an individual PRs for all of my breaking change updates. Or let me set it up so it's checking for rustling Rust for GitHub releases, and applying some regexes to my code base. So every 6 weeks, it's automatically updating my MSRV and my projects for me. Or
Has a lot of Rust specific support, or is it like a Rust
it's
project?
it's not Rust specific at all. This is actually just that mechanism I was just talking about is just plumbed together by checking for GitHub releases and then writing some regexes.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, I can always send people my Renovate bot configuration because it does a lot of really powerful things that have made my life as a maintainer much better.
Cool. Could you share
So
that on the Discord later?
uh, I think I have UDirect. I don't have the actual Discord.
Oh,
So maybe if
I'll
you
make
send
a
me that
link
link,
on
I'll
the
send that.
the presentation.
All right. So I talked about MSRV. Then one of the next things is a feature called Cargo Script. Has anyone heard of Cargo Script before?
Not many.
Nathan's biased because I actually got his advice on this.
Yeah, I'm very biased.
So let me pull up my RFC for this. So Cargo Script, the idea of it is there's times where you just want to be able to prototype, or you need to be like you need to do something on the playground, like just to be like, oh, how does this syntax work, or how does this API work? Well, the playground, if you want to use a library, the playground hard codes the top like 1,000 crates, and I'm not even sure what set of feature flags they configure those crates for. So it's very limited in how you can be able to do that. Or if you need to take some code and create a bug report against a project, you have to like document separately the dependencies from the rest of the information. CargoScript is a way to be able to combine all of that in one. So you're able to now have a single file that's just has what we call a code fence front matter that is able to declare your dependencies, and you're able to then just have your code in there. And you notice that there's this shebang in here. You can now just directly run this, and it just works. And so this lowers a lot of the barrier for creating cargo programs with dependencies dramatically. So this is something I've been very excited about, been working a lot on, and thanks to Nathan for helping to unblock a major design decision we've had that we've been blocked on for months now.
RustConf for the win.
So something I'm not going to have something to show for this, but sometimes something that's been coming up is, oh, my target directory's been blowing up. I'd really like a way to be able to clean up my computer, or oh, I do a update of Rust and I now need to go and delete all of my target directories because it's not going, none of it's going to apply to my new version of Rust.
Oh
We
my
do
God,
have
that's me.
we do have in work a garbage collector. It is first, or it's first going to be working on the global caches, so .crate files, any Git dependencies, things like that. And then we'll be starting to look at how we should be applying it to target directories. So that is something that's going to be upcoming that people can be looking forward to. And probably one of the more directly applicable ones to a lot of the people in this room is changes to cargo test. This is the one that's going to be the most nebulous of all the things I'm going to be talking about. This is something that several of us have realized that there's a lot of problems with how testing is done. For me, a lot of that has come through frustration of, oh, great, I go and write tests and the default way of writing tests does not work for me. So I need to go and write it all from scratch. And I've now done that, I think, like 5 times. So some of us got together and felt that it'd be good to actually bring up a new project team within the Rust project, and we've called it Testing DevX, where our focus is going to be on how do we improve the overall testing experience in Rust. We've not actually met yet because we need to finish rolling off of all of our existing projects, but if you want an idea of what we might end up talking about, for our roadmap, I'm biased. I came up with these ideas. I'm going to be proposing this as a starting point. I gave a presentation to in the Netherlands a couple months ago about ways for us to be improving testing in Rust. And I feel like I'm going to say this is probably going to be the starting point for discussion for what the testing DevX team is going to be focusing on. And so our hope is to, like, for me, a lot of my inspiration comes from Python. I don't trying to jump down to a point in here where that's actually meaningful. If I had my actual presentation up, it'd be a lot faster. Where Python offers a lot of really interesting features in the PyTest library. And basically, it's the how do we make it so Rust is at least capable of doing these kinds of things in tests. And I'm hoping this will make the overall testing experience much more flexible, much more powerful. All right, that is everything that I had. Are there any questions or thoughts? Or hey, I'd like this to be existing in Cargo also.
JSON was an unstable feature for cargo test
Oh,
output?
you didn't know that?
I did not know that.
So that was a fun one that caused some controversy because so there was a using an unstable feature requires two things. One, to be on nightly, two, to enable the unstable feature. But the testing library had a bug in it. It didn't actually check to make sure you're running nightly. So people were enabling this unstable feature all over the place and just running with it and assuming it worked. But they fixed that bug, made it so it's locked behind nightly, and then all these IDEs and all these other tools are like, that just broke everything. It's like, well, you were using an unstable feature. That's what you get. And there's a lot of iteration and change I'm planning to make to the JSON output because it's pretty bad. And through my experiments, I've been finding better ways of communicating the information. For those that don't know, the way tests work is kind of odd in Cargo and Rust. It's split between two things. Cargo test will go and build all of your tests and then kick off a test binary for each of your test files. The test binary will link against a library from the Rust project called test. And that's what provides, like, if you have to like do a weird invocations to be able to see this, but if you do like cargo test, then just dash dash and then new flags, that's coming from the test binary. And when you do that, it is, let me step back and think about this. All of that is baked directly into your binary. And where was I going with that?
Directly from the test binaries, not from
Yes.
cargo.
Yes. So the change that we're looking at making, if those who haven't heard of it, there's a tool called Cargo Next Test. And we're going to pull a lot of inspiration from that. One of the things that we're going to be doing off this is we're going to be switching the relationship where we're going to actually be running the tests all via their JSON output, and Cargo will intercept it, and then Cargo will then be in control of the formatting of it. So instead of this one library that's owned by the libs team that has to be very careful about backwards compatibility about everything, it's instead going to be a thing of, well, Cargo has a little bit more flexibility than the libs team on those kinds of things. And instead of having to like bake it into every binary, Cargo can have it in one place and provide a uniform experience across whatever custom test harness you want, as long as it implements the JSON protocol that we design. So we're going to hopefully have a much richer testing experience by moving things into Cargo, much faster, easier to iterate on that as well.
That sounds excellent.
So I'm also going to put on the Discord the link to this blog, which also links out to the video for my presentation I gave on this subject, because that'll be a good way to cover these topics.
Awesome. Other questions? Anybody got questions?
Yes, about cargo script, because I don't think I quite understood, or making sure. It's just, hey, we're gonna make this easy to write a one-off in Rust, and so we're going to import a whole bunch of stuff at the top automatically for you. Is that kind of the idea? And so you're working with.
So I'm going to need Nathan to repeat that question because you're too far away from the microphone.
Oh, here. Just say it again into the mic.
Okay. So, I'll try to project here. Good audio?
I can somewhat hear you, yes.
Somewhat. Uh-oh. I'll get close. Okay, so with cargo script,
Oh, hold on.
oh,
I didn't have the microphone selected. That was my bad. No wonder you could hear me, not you guys.
oh, okay.
Does that sound better?
How about now? Okay. Good.
Sounds good.
All right. So, with cargo script, the idea is just to make it easy to do a one-off something in Rust. Is that what I'm hearing?
One of them is for just quick one-offs. It's also for communication, like if somebody has a question on your corporate chat system, you can just like put this one snippet together and send it to them rather than multiple files, or like file a bug report. You just have this one snippet. So there's a couple of different use cases we're targeting with it.
Okay, and then, like, I'm looking at your fenced code there, and it says dependencies, clap equals this. And there was some mention of a whole bunch of other things being imported. Is it always a whole bunch of stuff, or is it just, whatever you specify there, or?
I don't remember what I said. I said a whole bunch of things, but yes, it is whatever you specify in your dependencies table plus recursively going down.
I think the whole bunch of things was when you were talking about Rust Playground providing certain
Oh,
traits.
Yes.
yeah. If you use the playground as a hard-coded list of packages you can use.
Oh,
It's
okay.
like the top 100 packages. And so like say if the playground got native support for this, you could use it with any package.
Okay,
The playground didn't have any way to specify your dependencies.
okay.
So does it just parse it differently and then compile it with the regular Rust-C compiler?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So Cargo will just check the file, pull out the dependency information in memory, create a full manifest for you, and then send the rest of the information to Rust-C as usual.
What's the file extension?
The two options are, there's three options. You, if you're doing it as a cargo script, you can either have the .rs extension or no extension. We haven't fully decided if this is going to be stabilized or not, but I've also made it so we have shebang support for cargo.toml. So you could also run your cargo.toml files as well.
Oh, interesting. So just like, wait, do you use the same cargo fence? How does that work?
Oh, so it would, if all you'd need to do in your manifest is just put in a shebang line and make your manifest executable, and then you can just /cargo.toml. That might seem not to be all that interesting of a use case until I implement a feature that I need to get around to, which is to be able to also make this all work with symlinking. So you could have like, so for me, if you noticed in my demos, I was using a tool, I was running something called Nargo. That is a shell script I have that wraps, this is an interesting one. Let me just,
Wait, hold
see,
on.
what
I
do
want to pause you real quick, Ed. So when you're saying run your cargo file, I was thinking run it like a Rust script, but I think what you're saying is you execute the cargo file, and what it does is it actually runs the whole project like you did a cargo run. Is that what you mean?
correct. And that's what I was going to get to.
Cool.
So I have this, so what I end up doing is I run all of my own programs at head, including sometimes cargo. So I have a shell script called Nargo that does a cargo run manifest path on cargo itself and then enables some unstable features for me. So I just always have those unstable features enabled. And so what I would instead be able to do, minus the -z script stuff, is be able to just, instead of having the shell script, I would just have a symlink in my bin directory that symlinks to my project, and now that project is available anywhere to run.
Oh, no,
That's kind of that idea
cool.
behind it.
And then cargo would natively support that.
Yep.
That's cool. Wow,
So-
that almost makes me, like, for my use case, I almost don't want to use the Rust script anymore, because I could just make symlinks to individual projects and, have the full-fledged everything. But that's sort of cool. You got sort of both
Oh,
options.
but so one thing to note about this, let me come over here to the right buffer. So I have so every time I get a clap bug, I create a cargo script for it just to help make a quick reproduction of it. So if I do clap 4960.rs, you'll see that it compiles and then runs it. I hope I didn't pick too slow of a compile one. Okay, it ran it. What I can actually also do is cargo test. Oh. And it's able to run tests on it as well. So you can use these cargo scripts anywhere that the manifest path flag is taken, except for some corner cases.
Whoa.
So these actually work as full Rust projects, as full cargo projects. You're not really missing out
Full
on many
sing- as full
features.
single file projects anyway.
There, yeah, on the I'm not too thrilled with the name cargo scripts, so I've been more generically, mechanically calling them single file projects with an embedded manifest.
Interesting. Now, can you put a Rust script file inside of an otherwise normal Rust project, or do they need to stay separate?
So we're still deciding when we want to deploy all these features. We might say if we come across a front matter not in your root create, we will error. That might happen, but one of the things I've enjoyed when working with Python is there's times where I just want to iterate on one file, and so I'll throw a main on that file and start running it as a program inside of my larger project. I'd actually kind of like to be able to support that with cargo script as well. Another side to what you're saying is not in the initial release of this, but eventually we'd like to also make it so these can be workspace members.
Nice. So an individual Rust script file could be a workspace member.
Not in the initial release, but eventually, yes.
Interesting.
So don't get too excited.
Oh no, I'm so excited. It's way too late for that.
Well,
Get excited when it releases.
I would
Get
say,
excited again when it releases.
There you go.
which with the help of Nathan and a couple other people at RustConf, that was one of the great things at RustConf is having Nathan, Tim McNamara, who wrote a Rust book and does Rust training as well, a Ling team member, another Cargo team member, and others, just being able to run between them, constantly being like negotiating out how to get this feature unblocked was a really powerful thing to have.
You were seriously busy at RustConf. I don't think you ever left the hall, did you?
I went to one presentation at RustConf, and I went to one unconf session, or two unconf sessions. And my days, I was waking up at 5:30 and going to bed after 11.
5:30? Who was getting you up that early?
Well, I need to fit in a run and a phone call with my family.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fair. Wow. Busy beaver. Other questions?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Do you work on cargo full time, or do you have another job and do this as part of that?
That is a very interesting question. I have the most odd of jobs. I, for a long time, was a systems developer who slowly morphed into being a build tool person and was working on like a Python build tool for a company. And a company reached out to me and was just like, we want to hire you to make Rust better.
So jealous.
That's basically it. So my job is full-time contribute to Rust somewhere, mostly focused on dev tooling. And that has me jumping all over the place. Sometimes I'm focusing on cargo. Sometimes I'm focusing on, actually at this point have over 100 crates on Crates.io. So like whether it's I've become a maintainer of Clap, I've become a maintainer of a couple other things. I've started my own projects in a couple areas. So I'm basically circling between those, doing improvements through them day in and day out.
That's awesome.
I feel like I should clap.
Oh, let's do it.
You're a much more wholesome group.
We need more companies who are willing to employ people like Ed, or people who want to be like Ed, like me, to work on things like Rust just for the good of Rust, because that's awesome.
And
Okay,
that's
so-
actually what,
Could use somebody like that. I said Bethesda could use somebody like that. God knows their creation engine's running with duct tape and a prayer now.
I was gonna ask, so do you get to set the agenda, or does the company say, hey, this would help out the company most, go focus there?
I mostly set the agenda. There are times where the person who the project manager for this team will say, we think this is important, and there's times where the rest of us are like, no, that does not make sense for an open source project, and there's times where it's like, yeah, that makes sense, let's go start focusing on that. So I, like, the thing he asked me yesterday was, hey, there's all that talk about the White House wanting to be improving security about things, make sure that we stay on top of that so that we are leading the way rather than being like dragged kicking, screaming through whatever security things the White House tries to push down. And that makes sense. And that's something that somebody working on Rust full time has an easier job of doing than part-time contributors. So there's no problem with that. But yes, 99% of what I do is my own agenda.
That's cool.
I mean, I basically got hired, and my first thing they said is, well, what should we work on? I was like, hey, there's this library called Clap that's been languishing for years. I think it would be important for us to work to get the next major release out. Trying to explain to a manager what Clap is, like, that's normally a weird thing to explain. Oh, this command line argument parser. Here's why it's important to the community. I need to talk about the ROI on this and all of that kind of stuff. Instead, it was like, no, that makes sense. Go do it.
Awesome. That deserves a clap.
Are you guys
I just much it.
You know, I was gonna ask that as a joke.
So we are not hiring for this kind of stuff right now, and I actually feel like my hire was a little bit weird because I think they saw some of my posts, thought I was more important to the community than I was, and I happened to be in a city they're hiring for, and so I think that's what so it's basically I felt completely like I am not these other people who I'm sitting in these meetings with. I do not fit in here. I'm going to but I know I can fit in here, but there was no evidence to prove that to them when they hired this. So I'm going to just like go along and try to like show them that I actually fit in, I actually belong here. So that I should not have been able to get this job. I got it, but glad I have it. And what we have some areas of initiatives that we're working on. I do not know where all we're hiring at, and our parent company is hiring, but I think that's more in like China and Europe than in the US that my parent company is hiring. And that's more for like more product focused stuff.
Another quick question. Where do you think Rust will be in 10 years, and where do you hope Rust will be in 10 years?
Where I think it will be in 10 years is not much different from where it's at today. I say that just because in the past, there's been efforts to collect roadmaps and come up with big ideas of where Rust is going to go. And then only like 10% of that roadmap is actually accomplished in a year. And that got a lot of people depressed. It's like, wow, we didn't really do much. So I don't think things are going to be changing dramatically. I think we're going to continue to, I think probably we're going to continue to improve usability, and we're going to continue to scale up within companies as Rust continues to get adopted by big companies of being able to handle problems like the registry authentication stuff I talked about, the MSRV stuff that I talked about. There's those kinds of problems. I actually am preparing a pre-RFC for another feature that is going to be big for things like GUIs, and I think Bevy would probably take advantage of this feature. If you've heard of Git Oxide, I think it's going to be taking this feature. And it's actually saying the word feature. It's the current feature system in Cargo works great, but there's limitations to it. I'm working on an alternative to the feature system that's not meant to replace the feature system, but to cover the shortcomings of the current feature system. And that's going to be for a lot of these kind of bigger, larger application type of projects that will be needing this, both in the community and within companies. So I think it's going to be improving the usability whilst trying to scale up to these more complex cases, I think is where we're going to continue to be taking Rust over the next 10 years.
Well, that'd be nice. What about your hopes? I think that was the second part of the question.
I can't think of anything specific I'd put at the 10-year horizon besides finally I'll be done with all these things I'm in the middle of because I have way too big of a backlog. I have too many ideas and too little time. But I'll instead say where I expect to be at within the programming community, or my hope for where we can be at in the programming community. I've been programming in C++ since before C++ 98. My hope is this will finally be the language that can kill C++. I've been looking for the C++ killer since the 90s, basically. And it wasn't Java. That took out a slice of C++'s use case, but not the core of it. It wasn't Java. It wasn't Dlang. It wasn't Go. But for me, Rust is able to take care of a chunk of the last chunk of C++'s use cases that are left. And at times, it actually feels as readable and clean as Python. That's not always, but there's times where it's like that. And I have ideas to try to work to make that better. And CargoScript is one small step towards those ideas I have.
That's great.
That's awesome.
More questions?
This is like the left field question. So does Rust have like a AST? Because you were talking about improving testing, and I know that PyTest basically wrote its own parser for Python, so it could do its unique and innovative stuff.
So PyTest parses the code for two reasons. One, for discovering all of your test files and doing all the shenanigans it's doing of automatically wiring up like function names to fixtures and things like that. The other reason is to make asserts prettier. I don't think we actually need to parse the AST to the same way that PyTest does to get those same benefits because of because we have proc macros. Proc macros in a way allow us to do some parsing of Rust, but it's in a lot more limited way. And it allows us to have things like an attribute on function saying, hey, this is going to be a test. And then that attribute can then do a degree of parsing using a library called syn, which provides an AST. And then that will allow us to extract function parameters and wire those up correctly. And then there has actually been work done on trying to make asserts prettier. There's a third-party library called PrettyAssert, and then they actually tried to do some of the like automagic parts of PyTest in the regular assert macro, and they ran into a couple of problems with that, so that's kind of stalled out. But there are ways that we can do that, mostly through the proc macro ecosystem. But I think that allows us to be a lot finer scope rather than let's parse an entire Rust file. It's like, let's parse only for what we need and then don't worry about the rest.
Okay.
Cool. So I got a question, thinking about registries again. The lack of like an endorsed, like readily available open source out of the box registry that you can run privately is a big obstacle for large organizations, at least from my perspective. I've seen that in my own organization where I work for my day job, that like, it's a problem. Like, it's a problem. Is that something is that on anybody's roadmap?
So
Like from the Rust project perspective, I mean.
I'm going to flip your question around a little bit differently. A big problem in the Rust community is that there is nothing that is endorsed.
True. But there
If you
are
actually think,
projects that are part of the Rust project, right? Like Clippy.
so that is built in and shipped with it, and you basically that is, so yes, Clippy has been elevated up to a first party project. It started as an external project.
Yeah.
Basically, Rust is a blob that absorbs things. The best way to iterate and experiment with things is outside of Rust, and then we absorb it. Kind of like I mentioned Cargo Add. That was a third-party tool. I did the work to get that merged into Cargo itself. What I was getting at with that, and the problem that what you're talking about will have is, I'll get to that. The problem that what you're talking about will have is, if it's going to be used by the project, or project is generally going to be used by the project, and a third-party registry wouldn't be used by the project. So instead, it would be us either maintaining for companies, which that's trying to foist onto volunteers work that just makes you money is kind of a messed up thing to do. So it's either foisting onto the project to maintain something when they aren't really the user of it, or to endorse an external project, which is really the first one is endorsing a project by making it part of the project. one problem, a lot of people in there's some select leadership within the community who is concerned about endorsing anything because they don't want to quote unquote pick winners and losers. Where the big problem there is if we endorse this project, what impact is that going to have on being able to have an upcoming project come and replace it? Like Lazy Static. Lazy Static was a library that was like used everywhere for static initialization. And then one point somebody came along and said, "Hey, here's this one cell crate. This is better than Lazy Stack." And then the ecosystem transitioned. If we start endorsing things, there's the concern that we will take air out of the room, that will make it so it's harder for upcomers to be like, "Hey, here's this thing I have. Let's build up adoption of it." However, this has a problem where it's hard to discover things. We're basically forcing people to do all the discovery process on their own, which is a nightmare. Like when I was writing, I have a bunch of different CLIs that I maintain, and at one point I was just, for the longest time, I was like, I'm going to not do terminal styling in my CLIs because that's a whole can of worms I don't want to have to research. And eventually I broke down and was like, I need to just research this. I had to like look at like 5 different crates, do a whole bunch of reading on them to try and figure out which one to use. Use them for a while, found none of them worked, and went to for what I need and went and created my own. And I'm working to make that the standard way of doing things, but there could be something that thing comes along. It's just like, how do we make sure we don't stagnate? We need to make sure people are aware of their options and what are good starting points for decisions. But we need to make sure that we allow us to be able to keep moving forward with new ideas.
So what I'm hearing in regards to my specific question is, the best thing would be for one to naturally emerge and maybe be adopted by Rust if it became like the de facto, everyone uses it, maybe it makes sense to pull it.
It will most likely not just be merged into the project because it doesn't make sense within the project. There's no use of it within like the open source community. It's all meant for the private company, so it's hard for us to do like requirements gathering, like be able to see what's going on. Basically, we're becoming free labor for companies.
What do you think about approaching it from the other direction? What if crates.io started providing private crates?
I think that could be an interesting way for funding of the Rust project.
Yeah. Just
I also see there being a lot of risk associated with that.
Sorry, say
What?
that again?
I also see a lot of risk associated with that, of like security and stuff. Now we're being responsible for corporate security.
Yeah. It would be a job. Interesting. Okay. I've monopolized question time. Who else has got questions or something to talk about? Go ahead.
Bear in mind, I'm young and inexperienced, so pardon me if this is a terrible idea. But what would stop Steam's like the best thing I can think of offhand as a comparison, where it's not necessarily like advertising anything, but it's just like an aggregate of like a lot of these different. You guys have been calling them crates, right? So what if it was an aggregate of these different crates that just showed off like just a networking source for easy access to find these kind of things, easy ways to like search them. If that already exists, pardon me for sounding dumb.
So-
yeah. Go ahead, Ed. You can respond to that.
There's a certain level of curation that still has to happen with that. I feel like this is where you need to find some way to solve this tension between stagnation and helping people just get started without just wasting their time and frustrating them. But it's still going to be a hard thing to do that within the project itself. There's a couple of things where people are attempting this kind of a thing. One is a project called Blessed, where it's one person making their opinion of here's what you should be using within the Rust community, and they accept PRs and input from other people for doing all of that. So you can see in here, oh, like, hey, the standard linter is Clippy. A lot of that stuff is more obvious, but it's like, if you do random numbers, what should you use? Like, oh, here's 2 crates to endorse, but here's like some comparisons of the 2. So this is one approach to it. This is the approach I've been taking also to help with this effort, which is there's a couple of people have like gone and created benchmarks for some things. And I'm like, well, there might be some more information that might be relevant. So I call this project Rosetta because it's not meant to be just about benchmarks, but comparative analysis. Like this is for argument parsers. This repo has examples for all these different argument parsers, and you can do direct comparisons of their code. And it will also then give you information like what's the binary size overhead between these different argument parsers? How long does it take to do debug builds of these argument parsers? And then when they run, how long does the runtime take? And then like, because this was easy for me to programmatically get, like, do they actually handle a common mistake that the fly-by-night argument parsers make? And then this is probably harder to see, but like, how many recent downloads does it have? How well adopted is it within the community? So this is like one thing I've been doing to try to like help ransomware, make it easier for it to narrow down the list of what you might want to be using. So there's some things that are being done with that. How to handle that within the project is still a difficult thing because like one, you're going to have to be telling people no, and when the more official that no becomes, the harder it is to receive. I've had to tell people no on here, and they've been quite upset at me, even though I've like, here's my guidelines for how to be on, how to get your crate listed on here, and they're just still like get mad at me. And then the whole issue of how do you help foster the growth of new projects? How do you decide when a project is relevant enough to be on a list like this?
Yeah, those are tough problems.
And then it takes time just to maintain something like this because I'm having to like, as these different packages do breaking changes, I have to go in and like update the code for it. So
Well, the comparison to Steam is kind of apt in that there's a whole lot of stinkers on the, what do they call it, the green lighting? Steam Greenlight or whatever, or the early access stuff. There's a lot of stinkers on there because it's gotten so big that they can't really curate it in the way they used to earlier on in the site's existence. So yeah, it's a very interesting dilemma in it.
It is.
So, you both are, like, more connected with the broader Rust community. Who are the big, like, enterprise players? Like, what, if you're looking at big organizations, and are there those that sponsor the open source side?
You want to answer that, Ed?
So sponsoring the open source side is an interesting one. My company is, I think, the only one that's actually sponsoring open source in terms of hiring people to directly work on it. Some companies at least are foundation members, and there's a couple of people who are employed by the foundation directly. People like the type of roles where they're on call. It's for a long time, like Crates.io's on call was all done by volunteers, and that just burns people out. So now we have somebody who's paid to be on call for Crates.io. So those are kind of the two main ways for that side. But then there's also people where it's like somebody that Nathan knows at his parent company, who's on the cargo team, Arlo. It's not necessarily his job to work on Rust full time, but because of the stuff he's doing for his job, he then needs to go and implement cargo features. So he's the one who is behind the registry auth and the way to get the credentials and things like that. He's the one who did that work.
And the sparse index.
Oh yeah, that's the person that also did the sparse index work, where instead of having to do this long get fetch every once in a while, it now just gets only the minimal amount of data possible. So Arlo did all that work not because Arlo's being hired to work on cargo, but because that was important for Arlo's job to get all those things done. And he's from Microsoft, so that's one area where we have some participation from that company. I know there's several AWS employees who are on different Rust projects, so there's somebody who's doing this, but again, they're more in the situation of, okay, there's one team at Amazon that is specifically Rust contributions, but they're probably about 50 to 75% time on Rust contributions, and then the rest of the time is on like their own build systems and how to improve Rust adoption within the company. So those are the main companies I've seen so far, besides any of the consultants like Ferrocene, Crab Nebula, Axolotl, and couple of the other ones I can't remember their names at the moment.
Do any of the JetBrains folks contribute to the open source bits?
I'm not aware of any JetBrain contributions.
Interesting. For how much they work on Rust, it seems like they do a lot behind their own little wall.
Well, what's interesting is the person's username is MattClad. I believe they're originally a JetBrains employee. They're the ones who wrote JetBrains' IDE integration for Rust, and then they were also a member of the Cargo team. They then went and I don't know if this was while they were still working at JetBrains or after, they wrote Rust Analyzer, and which JetBrains doesn't use, but this was just a completely separate thing. And so that's something that came in a way out of JetBrains.
Matt Cloud is still maintaining that, right? Rust Analyzer?
I don't know if MattCloud has handed off Rust Analyzer or not, or how much they're still involved. I know that they actually have a full-time job now working on a database system that's written in Zig.
In Zig.
It's
Interesting.
called Tiger Beetle.
Tiger Beetle.
Yep.
It's pretty sweet.
Interesting. Fascinating stuff. Cool. Well, any other questions for Ed?
I wonder what your opinion is on, like JetBrains just announced the new IDE, and I think they said they're gonna like stop supporting the plugins or something like that. I just wondered if you think that that's like a step forward for Rust, or if maybe it should have been kept as a plugin and so on, because they're going closed source with it now. Is my understanding.
I'm a Vim user. I have no. I've don't think I've ever opened VS Code. I've never opened JetBrains, so I don't have enough context to be able to say anything about what happened with Rover. I did have breakfast with some JetBrains people a couple of times this last week.
I have to
But
say, I
that's
don't really
it.
have an opinion on the plugin going to closed source, but I do think that Rust Rover being a dedicated IDE, another option, is a good thing.
That's initially what I thought, but looking in the comments, there were some people who felt otherwise, and I was surprised to see that, so I was curious if there was, more
I'm
on
sure
the other
there's-
side of the conversation.
Yeah, I'm sure there's other points of view. But like from a big picture standpoint, like I could see definitely like if you wanted to actually participate in like fixing bugs or implementing features, that's definitely a bad thing. But from the big picture view of, oh hey, a big name is specifically supporting Rust as an IDE. I know some companies have got these big contracts with JetBrains where you go to that company and you can use JetBrains editors, and that's like the default choice. And if it's not that, then you're sort of out of luck as an employee there, right? From that perspective, having them support Rust as a premier member of their editors is only a good thing, right? Raises visibility and support in certain areas, so I like that part of it.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's got Rust in the name, I like that too.
Levi, do you have any questions?
Not really. Covered a bunch of really cool stuff, so excited to see it come to fruition.
Yeah, and speaking of, when is this going to come to fruition, Ed? When are we going to see these things?
So most of what I showed is going to be in 174. Well, most of the things I showed in the first part is going to be in 174. In terms of CargoScript, I'm going to be, as soon as I get a PR merged, I'm going to, so people can try out this last design idea, I'm going to go ahead and post the official RFC for that, and that'll just need to go through the RFC process. So that's probably still another 3-6 months from being stabilized. Garbage collection, it's that one, global garbage collection, like your .crate files, that'll probably be in 175 or 176, depending on the pace of development for that. Cargo test changes, that's probably going to be in the 180s or later.
Right. So it sounds like most of your smaller changes come in 174, and then after that is coming the garbage collection cleanup. A little bit after that is the Rust script stuff, and then after that is the, what was the last one? Testing stuff.
Yep,
Did I get the order right?
that's about right. And I'm actually in progress trying to figure out how I want to express a more official roadmap for cargo. So that's in work.
I'll tell you what, I love the async working groups roadmap page where they just just having that one place to look at all the upcoming stuff. I keep
Yep.
pointing to people whenever someone asks me like, why don't you like async? Like, what's so bad with async? I sort of point to the roadmap and say like, I want all that stuff.
Yeah, the problem with so async is there. When having these conversations, this is an interesting one because async has a lot more defined of a goal. It's a lot more narrow of scope. Cargo it's everything to everyone. So it's very hard to just put down a single roadmap and be like it's more just driven by who's around and what are their careabouts. For a lot of this stuff, it's like this is something that I care about, so I'm going in and doing the work to at least get the discussions going and maybe doing some of the implementation and things like that. But if I, for some reason, leave and somebody comes in, the whole roadmap will change.
Makes sense.
Yeah, the only thing where I find cargo a little lacking is in the area of where you have to change a bunch of options depending on external dependencies, C dependencies and whatnot, and doing cross compilation all at the same time.
So one thing that I talked a little bit about alternative features. One thing that'll at least help with is most sys crates are actually kind of terribly implemented.
Tell me
Where
about it.
hmm?
I said, tell me about it.
It's very hard to control whether there's like three options for how a syscrate should be built. Either link against what's currently installed in your system, or statically link the source code that's vendored inside of the package, or auto-select based off of what it can detect of your system. And the control of that is done through the feature system where you have to manually wire these things up through your stack. Let me jump around real quick.
Control via features. Sometimes people control it via environment variables. Sometimes they control it via
Yep.
other things.
So I'm going to kind of do a quick preview. The feature that I'm working on a pre-RFC for is what I'm referring to as globals. This is an alternative features where instead of it being on or off and being local to just you and who calls into you, these are enumerations that can be set by anyone. It can only be set by a root crate, the thing that you're trying to build that all of your dependencies are being built for. It can only be set by that, and so that way this kind of helps to replace a lot of those kinds of things. So I have this example here where you say the get to sys crate, it can be statically linked, dynamically linked, or auto. And if you never set it in your root crate, it'll be defaulted to auto. And then here we're not depending on get to sys, we're depending on get to the Rust idiomatic wrapper, and we just say set global sys to static, and it'll then force it to be statically linked always. So this is an example. This is one thing that will hopefully be helping with some of those, at least the FFI part of things. I know there's that's part of
people that decide that they want to write an FFI sys crate or some sort of crate that has FFI bindings. There's just the guidance on how to do that.
Yeah, and there is some work that's going on for writing more guidance on those things. I can't really help much with cross compilation because that's not a use case I am involved in, and so I have very little context or background. I've not gotten to talk to too many people about it. This at least has come through. I don't need this feature myself all that much. Like I've been puttering along fine with features for vendoring when I need to, but I've been able to at least talk to enough people in different contexts where I've been able to like take all of the information that these people have said to try to come up with this feature. So need a lot more discussions to be able to fully get into how to help better solve cross compilation, but this is at least, and cross compilation is also a lot bigger of a problem, but this is an example of this is not even in an area that I care much about, but I've at least had enough different conversations to come up with this. So this is going to be posted on it.
People generally like to avoid cross compilation.
I'm probably going to be posting this RFC on internals, which is kind of where RFCs go through a brainstorming phase before they become more official. I'm probably going to post this on Monday. I'm actually taking today and tomorrow off for my wife's birthday, and I don't want to have a whole long discussion happen where I don't know anything that's happening. So waiting until I'm actually back before I post this. So you got a preview of something that almost no one else in the community has seen.
Thank you for that. And happy birthday to your wife. Any other questions?
I was curious if, like, I have no idea where I would even start with a private crate registry. Like, where would you start? What would you, like, at least personally recommend? Definitely not officially recommend, but personally recommend.
I've not even looked into it. For me, I've just also aware of the cargo team is constantly the cargo team can work very closely with the Crates.io team. So it's just like, oh, we're developing this new feature. Let's go and add the registry support for it at the same time. Like, recent example is, let me pull this up to show. Recent example was, if you notice, if it loads, okay. Let me make this bigger for everyone.
Is this the MSRV?
The MSRV, it'll actually show you, oh, this version of Clap needs 170. And if I scroll down enough, oh, these versions of Clap need 164. That was able to be done because of a close relationship of Cargo with Crates.io, and it's then meaning like, oh, we're sending additional, we're basically like, every time we do something like this, we're basically putting more requirements on a third-party registry for being implemented. Some of these features are optional, they don't have to be implemented, but that's something that we try to be mindful of, but also it's one where it's like, you basically always have to be playing catch up, and because this space is so unexplored or so immature at this point in the Rust community, like there's not good communication channels for when we do new registry changes like this. I've seen talk of different registries. I don't know their status to say like, oh, I personally would say this one, but I won't officially say it. I really wish we could have somebody take the time to try to refactor Crates.io to work as a third-party registry as well, because that way it makes it so when people make improvements, it'll feed back into Crates.io, and it'll make it so people then are able to take advantage of all the latest features with their third-party registry. So I feel like that'd be the best way, but unfortunately, no one seems to be doing the work for that. And I don't even know how the Crates.io team would feel about that. For the longest time, they've been understaffed. The Rust Foundation is now paying for at least one person on the Crates.io team to work full time. So that's at least making it so there's more work being done on Crates.io now. But for somebody to do like major refactors to it, that's a lot of review time that I don't know if they have. So there's some of the challenges with that.
Well, if any beneficial corporate sponsors are listening, I'd be willing to just do that as a full-time job, so, just saying. And I bet there's a lot of people here who'd be willing to, work on that kind of stuff if they were employed to do so. Just saying.
That actually might be something I should talk to my manager about, is that this might be a need in the community, in the corporate community.
I mean, that sounds fun to me. Oh, it's not fun. All right, well, thank you so much, Ed. Thank you for
having me. Maybe one of my Utah vacations will actually line up with a meeting of yours so I can attend.
Sorry, say that again?
I was just saying, hopefully one of my Utah vacations will actually line up with a meeting so I can attend. When I was in Utah last summer, it didn't work out, unfortunately.
Second Thursday every month, except for months like this month where we had a conflict like RustConf, where we couldn't get around. We're going to go till the top of the hour, so another 43 minutes or so. You're welcome to stay on and chat with us, or if you need to go, that's fine too. Same goes to anyone else on Zoom. Now that you're done presenting, if anybody else on Zoom wants to unmute or turn on the cameras and interact anyway, you're welcome to. You don't have to. So we're just going to sort of do shop talk. I did have like a Rust 172 on the roster for discussion. If people want to talk about that, we can, but we can really talk about whatever now. So anybody have a topic of discussion they'd like to bring to the table? sounds like that you got one came out just a couple days ago. It had a bunch of bug fixes.
That was
Just
really
crashed.
really good.
Well, you should see some of the things
Fun
that
stuff.
Pearson made.
I love hot fixes for crashes.
Did anybody else go to RustConf? No? We had? It was so fun. It was so fun. Although I gotta say, I mean, Albuquerque, my first experience, not my first choice. I prefer Portland. I prefer Portland. But I was surprised. My first time to New Mexico, first time to Albuquerque. Geologically, I felt like I was in Utah. Like
Respect to
same kind of mountains, same kind of desert. Except for it was raining the whole time, which I thought was
And
weird.
we're using.
It's like I didn't envision it as a wet place.
Maya, I know. Well, I've heard it.
6.
It's like animation, right?
It's 3 modeling and
Did you talk with
It's
one?
I used to use that one.
big company for us, or so
Oh,
everyone's telling
I
us.
say, I thought
Really?
it was
Wonder seems to be one of
Let's
He's
go.
sort of
Okay.
Maya's the one that my professor was pretty good.
That's awesome.
Were you,
Well,
did you go?
Talk to somebody's actually in animation.
No, I didn't.
Well, the guy,
Did you?
the guys who are teaching it, did stuff
Yeah.
with diplomas and stuff. And they say lots of
That's how I ended up in
But then
software.
at the same time,
Every
Disney
time I went
uses
to the
Maya,
career
so
fair,
I don't know if I trust
nobody
it.
cared. I studied physics. They just wanted people to
I'm pretty new to this.
So I was like, okay, maybe it's time to rethink my
I'm pretty new
life.
to this conference. Does Vivint use Rust at all in any capacity?
It's like,
I know Maya has
there,
it.
They do have
like,
We haven't got it yet,
small
unfortunately.
.com was there,
I've
like,
got 17 for